Good morning, everyone. My name's Ashish Parekh. I'm here from Nashville, Tennessee, and welcome to another episode of Love Talks, joined by my lovely co-host, Estera from England.
Hello.
And today we have two guests with us. We have Eric Chasen from the greater Boston area, and we have Sabine Varghese from Chennai, India. So we look forward to a great discussion, and hope everyone listening will enjoy our podcast today. And now I'd like to turn it over to my co-host, Dr. Estera.
Well, thank you very much, Ashish, and Eric and Sabine, welcome. It's very
Thank you.
good to have you both here today. As this podcast is all about relationships and dating and marriages, today's episode is also about marriage in a way, because we will be discussing divorce. To divorce or not to divorce? That's quite an important question for many people, men and women alike, who at some point come to the realization that their marriage is maybe not necessarily working anymore, and whatever they have tried to fix it wasn't working either. Definitely a divorce or even a breakup of a long-term relationship, that's nothing that we are looking forward to when we start the relationship, and that's probably nothing that we really want, even when we start seeing that our relationship is having some challenges or difficulties, because at the beginning you try to fix them. I've invited you to today because you're both divorced. And while Eric, you have a child as well, Sabine doesn't have children. But nevertheless, the whole idea of getting divorced, that's something that doesn't come as a light decision. And then, of course, if children are involved, there are also custody issues to be taken into account, also co-parenting with the ex-spouse. So it's quite a difficult topic, but today we want to debunk some myths about divorce, about divorced people as well, and bring more awareness to this topic, so everyone who is in this situation that they are considering getting divorced could listen to those who have experienced that, and will definitely have something to share about divorce and marriage that is ending up not in a way that anyone expected at the beginning, for example, during the day when you were getting married, right? My first question to you both would be, what can you do when you start seeing that your marriage is actually not working very well, or not working as good as it used to work at the beginning? How can you get it fixed? What were the things that you've done to fix your marriage?
Estera, thank you. I'm not an expert on marriage. Maybe I'm closer to an expert on divorce, because I've actually been married twice and divorced twice.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Completely different circumstances, which is interesting. Although the one commonality is I'm still quite friendly with both of my exes. That's about the where the similarities end. So my first marriage was about 5 years and no children, and I kind of married a friend. So we had difficulties, at least from my perspective, because there was never really the passion that was in the very initial phase. So that ebbed away, and we had a great bond from a friendship standpoint, but not a particularly passionate bond from a relationship standpoint. So that became a prevailing issue in my first marriage. In my second marriage, which I think is the reason, I think it was fair to just interject that I've been married twice. I think the second marriage with my son, who's now 17, relevant in that completely different relationship. There was a lot of passion there, and we did not date that long. We got married very quickly, where I had dated a long time before. We're married 5 years. We were older. We got married and had a baby and got married and bought a house and everything very, very quickly. But it was never right. It was great from a passion standpoint, but not so great from a fundamental relationship standpoint. That sort of sets the stage for I think, back to my original point. So I still stay in contact through social media with my first wife. She went on to have a family of her own, and she has 2 grown boys now and live happily ever after in her second marriage. In mine, we didn't stay married very long, but we have been, what I would say, pretty successful raising a child and co-parenting in two different homes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so from what you're saying, it sounds that your first marriage was a bit like a marriage of convenience, so to say.
We dated a long time, and it was like, okay, we've dated for 5 years, and we either got to get married, and it probably was an error in getting married, I guess. But
you wanted to do the things right, I guess. That's probably the right.
So, like I said, I sort of felt like I married my a best friend. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I've actually had a discussion last week with someone else who is not here on this podcast, but that was also one of the things that they've mentioned, that there wasn't that much passion, and then there wasn't that much sex either in their relationship, and that started to be a problem. But yeah, when I thought when you were talking about your first marriage, I thought that it's in some way it reminded me of those arranged marriages in India. And well, I mean, I don't know, Sabine, whether yours was arranged or not, or whether you had a love marriage, but
it was arranged.
It was arranged. So was it also a problem in your marriage, Ben?
See, like we spoke in one of the earlier discussions, it was never about that. It was more about the toxicity that came in,
okay.
and that, at least, like, okay, here's the thing. I mean, I did meet her, I did have conversations with her for a few months and so on and so forth, even before getting married to her. See, there's a saying in India, or at least my mother keeps saying that, is that without cutting open a jackfruit, okay, you don't know whether the fruit is going to be sweet or it's going to be raw.
Yeah, we have a saying
in
Poland that, well, if you don't know what you are going into, you're buying a cat in a bag.
Yeah.
You actually don't know what you're buying.
Exactly. So that was the thing. And I always say that, okay, knowing someone is one thing and living with someone is a different thing altogether, right? And that's where the challenges and the issues started, and a lot of things, few of the manipulations in terms of getting certain things done. And there was a lot of convenience factor being looked upon, which is something relatively at that point of time not affordable. And yet I was being pushed, and there were certain objectives that my partner had, which was not realistic at that particular juncture. So that kind of piled up, and then, and to achieve those, or to get those kind of conveniences, and to get those kind of luxuries or whatever, there were a lot of manipulations and toxicity that kept happening in the background, which I came to realize only towards the end. I didn't involve my family, but her family was involved right from the beginning. There was a lot of pressure coming in from their side as well, and trying to let me know that, okay, you know what, oh, she's just immature, just give it let it go, and then we are there to support you, we are there to protect you, and this and that. And when I had that discussion with my family, their family was called upon. When we tried to have that discussion, they took the blame for it. But when the divorce started happening, or when the separation started happening, when the level was reached, it was as if I was to blame for everything. And I'm like, here we go. Right. So that was the actual eye opener. I mean, even when she left the house initially, I called her, I asked her, you don't have to go, we can work this out, even till the very last moment. At that particular, when she left, and she was away for almost 2 weeks, I just realized that, you know what, maybe it's for the better. Right. I am putting in so many efforts, and I'm trying to bring her back, and so on and so forth, but she's not willing to. Let's see how this ship sails, and let's see where this goes to. Over a period of 3 years, I've just learned that I think that decision that I took to let the ship sail and see how it goes was the right one. I mean, though it was a long separation, and legalities, and a lot of law enforcement issues, and so on and so
that's
forth.
something that we will talk a bit later also about, like the technicalities of divorce.
Yeah. So I just said, you know what, it's worth it. And for the last 6 months that I've been at home, I was just reliving all those and trying to get rid of all that negativity and all that toxicity that was there.
I wanted to ask both of you because, I understand that was a very difficult process to get to that realization that you actually need to divorce because your marriage is not really working out. But I guess there were some things that you tried to do to save your marriage, right?
In both cases, we tried, the marriage counseling route, marriage therapy, and both individual and in group. there was more at stake, if you will, in my second marriage because of our child together. And
Yeah, exactly.
although we weren't actually married for a long time, we did even post divorce, which is interesting and perhaps not even unusual. Post divorce, we continued to try, even dated as ex-husband and wife for a number of years after, and
That's
still
actually quite unusual.
It is unusual? Oh, maybe it is. We traveled as a family and all that stuff. So we tried, even though we lived in separate homes. And I used to kid around and say, I love Joni, but I can't live under the same roof with her. And anyways, after a short marriage, raising a child in independent homes for most of his life, and then attempting to make it work again, even post-divorce, we did a lot of pre-marriage counseling because there was already troubles before we got married. We did marriage counseling, and I'm not sure we did post-marriage counseling. But after a number of years of trying, we then sort of decided that it wasn't going to work. But we did most of the traditional things. I think, not to jump ahead at all, but I think it's really the respect and the calm interactions, or particularly with a child around. I'm talking about that right now because I can think back to a child myself, being a child myself. I can certainly equate this to our son. And it's not often that we argue in front of him. And of course, he's getting older now. He's almost 18. But children don't like seeing their parent, whether they're together under the same roof or whether they're apart. Children have understandably, at least I did, and my son, a very low tolerance for seeing your parents at odds. So you can imagine how that can be really difficult, whether a couple stays together or whether a couple splits up. The length and the intensity of the conflict is the problem. So I'm happy to say, for the most part, through the years of raising our son, we've been able to manage that. Not to say we didn't have it, but most of the time it was not in his presence. I can think of a couple of times in 17 years or 15 years that we were split up, that we had, but most of the time it was not in his presence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy to do, by the way, because in most of what you argue about, I've found is about the child, differences, because if you're split up, right, you're not arguing about who's taking out the trash or any other details, intimate or otherwise. It's basically financial and care of the child, right, including financial, I guess. So
yeah, exactly. That becomes the number one topic.
That does, yeah. I think whenever you have kids in the picture, I think the priority changes to focus on the kids instead of each other. But you also don't want to be in a place where if you and your partner are fighting and bickering all the time, and like you said, you can't live under the same roof, then it's going to be hard for the kids. And then they might feel like, oh, it's their fault that the divorce happened, which you never want to happen.
That's for sure.
And
well said, Ashish.
How did you, Sabine, try to save your marriage?
Well, there are a lot of things that I tried to do, be it from asking her to come for counseling, but she never agreed, and tried to get my friends involved, someone she would be comfortable with. She was spiritual, so there was a person I knew at work who was also equally spiritual and seen a lot in life. So try to arrange a conversation between the two of them, but she never agreed. And trying to get her engaged into a lot of things that she would love to do to distract her mind and try to see if that she can bring in the happiness out in herself rather than like being bitter all the time. Try to encourage her hobbies to have her engaged, because at times an idle mind can be an issue. Gave the option for her that, okay, it is up to her whether she wants to work or doesn't want to work. I can still manage. Initially she wanted to, so she was supporting, and then she said she doesn't want to. I was like, okay, fair enough. Do your thing, and I don't have a problem. If you want to do something from home, let me know. She was a good painter. She was a good singer as well. So I spoke to a friend of mine who used to do all these Hillsongs recording and everything. So I had a recording studio. Try to engage her in that, but she never bothered to even go in and check. Try to bring in canvases and everything so that she can paint, but she would do one or two and then leave the rest over there. I said I can get this on auction as well. I can try to see if you're ready to do at least 15 to 20 of these. And then from a personal standpoint, did try to go down on the knees literally and ask her, okay, what are the things that you want me to do that we can probably help, that can probably help fix it. but it was never a clear thing that okay, what she actually wanted, or it was always as if like she never wanted it to work. A kind of a message that I was getting. That's when, like, after 5.5 or 6 years or something, I just decided, you know what, this is not going to work.
So basically, what you are both saying is that you've actually tried different things on different levels. It's not that people just make the decision about getting divorced quickly when something
Yeah.
doesn't work. But as Eric said, he tried counseling with his wife, and that eventually didn't really work out as it should. You also tried spirituality. That's something that many people also try to do, to contact a priest or other spiritual leader, especially if they are believers, right? I've heard from my friends also that that was something that they tried before their divorce. And you also, Sabine, your story shows that also tried actually other things. And it's not
Yeah.
only about counseling, not only about looking for some spiritual guidance, but you were trying to accommodate your wife in very different ways, and that never really had the response that you were probably expecting. So I guess getting to that point when you know that divorce is the only option is not easy. But what are all those signs that tell you at that particular moment that divorce is actually the best option? Because there are different things that are usually mentioned. Like, for example, some couples say that they argue over the same thing again and again. Other couples, on the other hand, they don't argue anymore because no one cares anymore, right? So there is no arguments. So what were the signs in your marriage that it was actually getting to its end?
Oh well, the moment she said that I'm cheating on her, so that was the that was it. I mean, like, and
Mhm.
and worst is the person who actually she claimed that I was cheating on with was the one who was wanting to actually fix my marriage.
Mhm.
I bored in, and it was one of the Indian festival called as Onam. It's a harvest festival, and I had invited my friend over, and a couple of days later onwards, she just started saying that you're cheating on me with her and this and that, and
Mhm.
so that's the end where I saw he. I think, you know what, it's just not going to work, and she's just trying to find an excuse
Mhm.
to put things on me rather than accepting the fault that she has, which is like she just doesn't want to accommodate. I mean, I wanted a family. Okay, she was not ready to start a family, or rather she wanted to have a family, but she wasn't going to go through certain medical things,
Mm.
like, say, for example,
Yes, I
prenatal care.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, prenatal care or things like that. Then I said, okay, how about we going in for an adoption? I convinced my parents. My father initially was not too keen on it, but then he said that, okay, if it gives you happiness, might as well, go ahead. And that turned back on me, and not only from her. I was attacked by her parents as well. Who do you think you are
Mm.
to say that my daughter
Oh.
can bear a child for you? I'm like, hey, 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 I didn't say that. So we have three options. We both go for counseling for
Mm.
prenatal and any sort of medical checkups that is required. Not only her, me included as well. I'm not taking putting my hands up and saying that I'm fine or anything. I can have issues as well. So let's both go. Let's get tested. I don't have a problem with that. Second thing, okay, if you're not willing to go through the procedures or whatever, then let's go ahead and adopt a child. I did that, but thankfully, at the end, though I missed that opportunity, but I'm happy that okay, a child did not have to go through that.
You were basically pretty much arguing over everything.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Also, I think like if trust is eroded, no matter how much counseling you do, you can have counseling like through, a religious organization or a non-religious organization. But I think like if that foundation is gone, then it doesn't matter. But or you have external influences affecting your marriage
Mm.
that can also just make it harder to reconcile.
Mm. It's a pretty important thing, trust, actually. It's trust is the foundation of every relationship, not only a romantic one, but even friendship. So it's really difficult if trust is not there. But what about you, Eric? What were those signs that really like gave you the certainty that your marriage is over and it's time to
Yeah.
divorce?
I guess it's a shorter list of what wasn't of issue. So interestingly, there wasn't any trust or any issues like that. So it was never any of that, which is good, or any kind of listening to Sabine. There wasn't any jealousy or trust issues at all in either direction. So that was a strong point. It was more of I think, a clash in operating styles, for lack of a better way to say it. I want to say it or articulate it in a way that I'm not being judgmental, even though it's kind of hard not to be, because I'm the only one giving the testimonial. So, so it's going to sound like I'm being judgmental, but I think first I'll sum it up in it's kind of a lack of tolerance and a lack of acceptance in the different operating styles, basically, is what it came down to. Much like you asked the question, it sounded like with Sabine too, it got to the point that we were sort of arguing about everything, and it ended up being a real stressful situation where it was constantly stressful. I had just been part of a startup company, which was very demanding, and Joni at the time was home raising a small, an infant toddler. And then so we had this clash in communicating styles and personality clashes, and it was very hard to overcome, without the tolerance and the acceptance and the compromise and things like that. So it was more of the fundamentals of communication and fundamentals of relations. And then even with a lot of passion between us, that erodes when you're not getting along, right? So then there's another issue of the intimacy or the sex is without getting along. There's not, that. So then it just begins to, erode, even though that was a strong element of our relationship when we were getting along. It surfaced as an issue, right? Because then if you're not getting along, then
exactly, sex is not going to fix anything in the end, because it's just not enough for a relationship.
I guess in summary, to answer your question, it ultimately came down to the stress of being together was feeling insurmountable. So, the decision was made that one of us sort of had to leave for peace of mind. Oh, and I would add that I did experimental, leaving for a week, leaving for 2 weeks, leaving for a month, and then leaving for good.
And how did that go?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was a short-term fix. It was like a Band-Aid fix, but never sustainable.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you are not physically together, then, you don't interact that often, right? There are no reasons to actually argue, probably, or quite a lot of those reasons are gone. So yeah, if you separate physically for a week, for a month, then things may look like they are actually getting better. But in the end, when you are back together,
it's all the same things.
The same thing is going on. So from what you are both saying, in your cases, the end of the marriage was pretty much marked by lots of arguments and arguing all the time over the same things or different things. But I must say that what I've also heard from my friends and what was my experience in my long-term relationships, well, I've never been married and divorced formally, but in my long-term relationship, it was actually the other way around. There was more arguing at some point before the breakup, like half a year. But then just before the breakup and the realization that the relationship wasn't actually going to progress any farther, that was more about having no arguments, not really wasting the energy on arguing over different things. Everyone was doing their own stuff. We had different friends, different circles, different networks. So in the end of the day, in my case at least, and from what I heard from some other friends of mine, it was more about living with a flatmate, because all the intimacy on different levels was also pretty much gone by that time. So I guess there are different ways to actually spot that your relationship is not going to manage for any longer, and they can be different. So I guess that's pretty much depends on the particular case. But what to do when you are already at this point that you know that you are going to divorce, because that's something that is quite difficult to handle emotionally. Even what research says, divorce is such a major life event like a death of our parent or a child or someone close to us. So it seems that it's a very, very stressful situation. What was the way that you tried to look for support, or how did you manage to cope with that experience of divorce when you were already divorcing, or just before that when you knew that the divorce is the next step?
So I was fortunate enough to be able to stay with my brother, sister-in-law, and their family, which was still close enough to be able to see my son regularly. Yeah, it got to the point that something I didn't mention earlier, but maybe worth mentioning now is that, relationships, some people say they take work, right? And I can't disagree with that relationships take work. But I think there has to be a point. I think the point is when it feels like it's more work than
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. I think there's a crossover point when it's more work than joy, or more work than partnership, or more work than and then that's a real good sign. So, and ours got to the point that it was just even beyond that it was very, very stressful being under the same roof. I left and had already been leaving for short increments, like I mentioned a little bit earlier. A week here, a couple of weeks there. And then ultimately I went, and I did have the support of, as I said, sibling, and both a sister and my brother's wife, a sister-in-law. I was able to stay with them, and it was peaceful, and had their support and their guidance.
What about you, Sibi?
I didn't have much, at least from my family though. Initially, my mom was the only one who supported, but the others never did. And then there were a couple of my family members who said, you know what, let it go, it's okay. They were there, but it was not when I actually needed it. It was more of a solo ride for me all throughout. Yes, that there was a friend who was trying to help me fix the marriage, but eventually her name was getting dragged as well. So though she did try to lend a hand and try to support me, but at the same time I had to be cognizant of the fact that okay, it shouldn't have ramifications for her in the future, because she was married, and unnecessary, her marriage life, which she had just recently started, should not get impacted. My mom, I was physically distant because my mom lives about 2,000 kilometers from where I live, but and my entire family is in a whole different city. So I was by myself most of the time. But then there were a couple of friends who did try. But then I'm the kind of guy who tries to handle my thing by myself. Yes, sometimes you need that, and that is my biggest advice to people, that never try to walk this road alone. You always need support, and you always need that. So one of the things that I did was I engaged myself into my work, and that drove me and kept me focused to a large extent. But then as things were getting a little too violent, and for lack of a better word, toxic may not be the right word, but again, it was just getting too much at that particular juncture. I really needed someone, and there were a couple of guys who did support me and who did lend me a hand. And thankfully, one of my friend had just traveled from Australia, and he was that little guardian angel for a period of time. And then after that, Mrinal, stepped in, and he was supportive to a large extent. So it was towards the last a year or so when my divorce was actually progressing. That was the actual time when I really got the support. But prior to that, it was just me trying to overcome it.
Well, I think it's difficult, especially when you don't really have any support in terms of your closest family. Eric was quite blessed. That's true that not everyone always have their closest people where they are physically. That's one of the things. And then I guess for men, it's probably also much harder to ask for help. So it's much harder to realize that you have to ask someone to help you. Was it in your case like that?
Yeah, for me at least,
Sorry.
yeah, because my pride took over me. Like you said, yeah, being a man, it is the thing that okay, you don't tend to generally go and ask for help, but yeah, the pride did take over me, And I thought that, okay, I can fight this battle on my own and try to come out of it. That, like I said, I mean, it's my biggest advice. Don't do that. Don't do that. It breaks you. It completely breaks you. I mean, I tried different things. I engaged myself in work, tried going for long drives, just making an excuse to get out of the city. Hit the bar a couple of times, which was stupid. But yeah, I mean, those kind of stuff. So no, it is not the right thing to do.
What about you, Eric? How was it for you to ask for help?
I similarly to Sabine, I hit the bar at the time too, and got together with friends in that kind of social capacity. But again, as we touched on, was fortunate to have a real stable, supportive, safe zone, if you will, of my brother and sister-in-law's home in there. And also, like Sabine, I was quite occupied with work at the time, which especially in retrospect, is a great distraction. Also had professional help in terms of a therapist. And so as you mentioned earlier, Stara, when you sort of compared it to, it's a loss. It's different than a death, but it's also can lack the closure of a death. It can be challenging in a different way than a permanent loss, if you will. A death is certainly much more permanent, but there's also a certain amount of, absolute closure in a death.
Yeah, that's
how
true.
we're able to manage that closure, I guess. And we do often, regardless of what our beliefs are, we typically have some kind of ceremonial thing to help with that process and other things as well. But a loss of a relationship or the death of a relationship, if you will, is a loss that took me a long time to really have closure. In a sense, when you have a child, really, as much as you might want closure, in a lot of respects, it's
involved with that person.
Yeah, so it's a closure of one or some dynamics of the relationship, right? And it's delayed closure for many years, if any closure on the rest of the relationship, because you are always connected with that person. So I've been fortunate to say that from a family standpoint, me getting along with my ex-mother-in-law, or my father-in-law before he passed, I was always very close with them. We were able to bridge that gap from a family with the grandchild and the niece and the all that kind of thing, and his cousins, and everybody stayed very close, even though we were split.
Yeah, exactly. And as you've mentioned, when you have a child, it's much more difficult than when you don't, because in the end of the day, if you're divorcing with someone and you don't have a child, you don't have any other issues that would be going on beyond the point of your divorce, then it's much easier because you can separate at that point. And that's it. Yeah, everyone goes in their own direction, and you don't really have to interact with that person. But in your case, Eric, as you've mentioned, you have a child. And I wanted to ask you, how is it to co-parent with someone who used to be the closest person at some point, and then after the divorce, of course, the whole dynamic changes? What would be your tips for men who are in the same situation to somehow make this co-parenting benefiting the child without any arguments or without any manipulations and toxicity behind?
There's no absolute perfect solution, I found, because the fundamentals, if you were able to get along and able to manage things, chances are you'd still be married. So there's some friction just by the mere definition that you're not together. But having said
that's
that,
actually very, very interesting what you said, but that's very true, because obviously you're getting divorced because you can't get along, right? So,
but yet you still have to, for the sake of the child. Well, there's some, I'm blessed and grateful every day that I've not had this kind of split, but there's some divorces, we all know these people, even with children involved, that is very, very contentious and very, very bitter. And where that's more common, maybe early on, depending on the circumstances of the divorce, it usually tends to subside as people move on with their lives. But I know people that years go by and it's still not subsided. It's still, they purposely make difficult times for the ex, which in turn makes difficult times for the children. So a critical piece, and this is so much easier said than done, and it's much more complex than the way I'm going to describe it, you really have to minimize. And again, I'm not perfect at this, but I work at it, and I have a lot of history, or we have a lot of history, that it's been smoother waters than choppy waters. Thank goodness. You really have to check your ego at the door, so to speak, in the spirit of getting along for the child, even though you disagree on some things. And what do you typically argue about? You argue about the child, obviously, and it's around, oftentimes it's, should he or she go to this school or that school? Should they go to sleep at this time or that time? When they're younger, should they have this kind of nutrition or that kind of nutrition? We didn't have a lot of this early on when he was younger, but if you're interjecting other people into their life, like a new partner or a significant other, that can complicate things, which we didn't have a lot of that, but it's happened more as he's gotten older, which is obviously easier. Our son has his first girlfriend now at 17, which is a whole other. So that caused some conflict between his mom and I. Actually, we were able to manage through it. So typically, we can have a flare up, and because we're distant, we live across town from each other. It usually cools off. So it's a little bit of an ebb and flow kind of thing. And like I said, I'm grateful every day that most of the time throughout the years is we've been able to co-parent peacefully, although we're not always on the same page. I would argue that parents under the same roof aren't always on the same page.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
I
must say that in my family, my parents never got divorced, but I think personally that they should have done that very early on. But exactly, I have that experience from my childhood, that parents under one roof sometimes don't really get along at all in terms of co-parenting.
We have gotten a lot of great feedback. Sometimes you feel like it's an uphill climb, both managing your own life and your co-parenting life and your child's life and all that kind of stuff, helping with that. But it really feels good. We get a lot of, just seeing your child as a good teenager and a good person, and getting feedback that, hey, you guys did a great job with him in this case, is reassuring that we did okay. So it's rarely easy, and every stage, it's always something challenging.
It's great what you've just said, that pretty much in the end you can see whether your child had a happy childhood, had a happy time with the divorced parents, because that's something which is visible in the end, right?
The raw material turns into something, and that product, if you will. I'm grateful every day for it. that
very,
it's worked
very
out okay.
good that was the outcome in your case, because it's always in that kind of cases when children are involved, whatever parents do, whether they are together or not, it should be for the benefit of the child. But as you also mentioned, lots of people actually try to make their life even more harder after the divorce, and children are used as tools to do so. So that's very unfortunate. And let's face it, that's actually child abuse, because the child is involved in the whole situation, and often the child as such is manipulated as well, either by one parent or even by both. That's definitely something that shouldn't be taking place. The last thing that I wanted to ask you both is about some tips on the practicalities of the divorce, because you, Eric, you are in the US, Sabine is in India, and of course these are different countries, so probably different proceedings and different things that you have to think about. But if you could mention the most important things about the technicalities of the divorce, because lots of people who are in that situation that they would be getting a divorce, they may not think about this or that, and then in the end it can cause additional problems for them. So what would be the most important things to know?
Well, to start off with, get a goddamn good lawyer. That's the first mistake that I did.
You didn't get a lawyer?
No, like I said, I was trying to tackle it myself and everything, trying to fix it at the initial phase. When I did get the lawyer, it was not the kind of lawyer that I should have gone with. It was a friend's recommendation, but the thing was, it didn't work out very well. Then I had to change to a different lawyer, though he was a bit more aggressive and everything. But then also, it is emotionally draining and at the same time financially draining as well. Right, so be prepared for that is what I would say. Those court visits that you get, at least in India, the way it works is that you keep getting dates. The judge would just go ahead and postpone the case, adjourn the case without even listening to you, right? Even though you're present or not present or whatever. Just right from the beginning, get a good lawyer for yourself, someone who can represent you strongly, and be honest with your lawyer. Don't try to put a picture where you're just showing yourself as a good guy or a good girl. Be honest with them. At least in my case, I was trying to be as honest as possible. There were times when it went into law enforcement as well. I mean, she tried to charge me for a couple of things, but then when I spoke to the cops and everyone, they realized that it is made up story. When they were trying to say negative things about her, I defended her completely, and I said that, okay, you know what, hey, you're not supposed to say such things. She's still my wife. I mean, though, yeah, we are walking a path wherein we might separate eventually, but she's still my wife. Don't go about saying such things about her. They were asking if she's seeing another man or something like that. I was like, no, she's not the kind of girl. I don't think so. She may say similar things about me, but I wouldn't say anything about her. A lot of the stories that she's putting in is false. Things in India do get a little complicated. So get yourself a good lawyer. Be prepared for a long battle. If it is not going to be mutual, try to settle it as early as possible. If you have no kids, it's even easier. But then the thing is, like I said, I made the mistake of dragging it, which I shouldn't have initially.
What about you, Eric? What would be your tips for people?
Yeah, so I can't disagree with Sabid's recommendation of having good representation. That's always good. And having said that, though, to the extent that you can work things out, whether it be related to assets, what else? What is there else to argue about? Assets, whether you have children or not, and then of course, children are the two things that you would.
True.
And not in that order but, so to the extent that regardless of your legal representation, to the extent that you can work that out, which we had some disagreements. I mean, I had a business and there was some contention for a period of time, and then ultimately, do you want to continue to pay lawyers, or do you want to continue, or you just want to work it out, compromise and work it out? And we did that. And we worked it out, and when we went into court, it was all agreed upon in advance without having to utilize the courts. We basically brought the agreement. It was worked out four-way, both two lawyers, she and I, and then we went into court with an agreement. And it was essentially stamped by the judge, and that was it. And we've only had one change to it in a bunch of years, and there's only a number of years left. Once the assets, at least in the United States, once the assets are settled, they're settled forever. And then the child custody and support and all that stuff, that's relevant until the child reaches a certain age.
Yeah, of course. If something happens that would really...
Yeah, different income situations,
exactly.
Or there's a bunch of different factors. And I do have to say, for the most part, I think, I'm not sure we could say this in the US years ago, but I think the court system, and maybe I have rose-colored glasses on about this, but I think the court system is pretty fair. I think it used to not be so fair with children involved. It used to be like, the dad would see their children like every other weekend. I never had that kind of split. It's something to think about, though. You should really, you have to also think about, if you're providing for the child, on either side, what that looks like, because you have to do after work, and there still has to be childcare. And a big factor in this is the age of the children and how many children. So it started very young with a very young child, that is. So there's childcare. But again, to the extent that you can agree on things and compromise, otherwise it can really be a very, very, it's one of the old sayings that the only people that make out really are the attorneys, because the longer it drags out, the more money they're paid. And ultimately it's still going to be solved. And do you want to solve it between you as two parents, or do you want to have the court solve it, making your decisions for you? So that's really what it comes down to.
That's a very good tip, I would say, and especially here in the UK. Well, I don't have anything to do with the legal system, but my friend, she got divorced a couple of years ago, and that's how I know that here in the UK, the courts don't even want to have those arguments in the court. They require you to actually get a mediator and do the mediation at your own cost before get the things sorted, for example, custody issues, and then only go to court to get it approved.
I would say that's pretty similar here. They're not very happy if they have to intervene. In other words, that it's so contentious that you can't come to any agreement or compromise,
Exactly.
and the judge has to intervene. It's usually they're not very happy about that. You're letting the courts decide your life, basically. You know what I mean? That you can't get along well enough and to do that. So it's very similar. They prefer that you come into the court very much so with a mediated agreement.
I think just, what both Sabine and Eric have said, it's really great. I obviously know like some friends who have gone through the divorce process, and when they have kids, it is tough. Sometimes I think if the girl's parents don't like the guy, then it makes it harder because then that's that external influence that affects your marriage. But I think at the end of the day, everyone just needs to put their pride aside, because like if you have kids in the picture, focus on the kids. If you and your spouse have a disagreement and you just can't work it out after counseling or anything like that, then just make sure that you focus on the kids and make sure that you show them the love, and you guys try to be as civil as possible. And if you can't, then only thing you can do is like God help you. But at the end of the day, focus on the kids. That's the main thing.
Really well said, Ashish.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very insightful and also interesting discussion today. And I would like to wrap up this topic with something that you, Eric, said at some point of this discussion earlier, that the point when you feel that it's more about working on your relationship rather than having fun and life together, that's the point where you should definitely think whether continuing this relationship makes sense, whether it's a marriage or a long-term relationship, because this is exactly where many people get trapped, is that notion that you should work on your relationship. And of course, that's very important, and every relationship requires some work, especially at the beginning, because it's two people getting together. Of course, there will be some tensions. They will not be exactly the same in terms of the reasoning, thinking, and also maybe not all values and what they think is important in life. But at the point where you feel that it's only about working and every day feels like being in some sort of a labor camp instead of enjoying your marriage or your relationship, that's definitely the point when you should start thinking whether it makes sense to be in the situation. There is limit to that. So that was a very important thing, Eric, that you mentioned. Thank you very much for being here with us.